If you want to read a book that explains the social transitions that Ukraine has gone through in the past 30 years, then Andrew Wilson's The Ukrainians and Anna Reid's Borderlands would both be good books for that matter. If you're looking for a book that describes the acts of war and political events leading up to the full-scale 2022 invasion, then Russia and Ukraine, Entangled Histories, Diverging States by Maria Popova and Oksana Shevel would be a good book. Serhiy Plokhy's The Russo-Ukrainian War, A Return to History would also be a good book. And Chris Miller's The War Came to Us would as well be a good book. If you want to read a book about the history of Ukraine and why it's not Russia, then perhaps Serhiy Plokhy's The Gates of Europe is the best choice for that question. However, if you're currently trying to follow the news on what's going on in Ukraine right now and have missed a few news cycles in the last couple of years, this book, Our Enemies Will Vanish by Yaroslav Trofimov, is perhaps the best book available. What Trofimov does is he takes the recent events and provides an informative narrative where the last few years are presented in a single story. While this is what many books attempt to do, it is refreshing to have a book written that focuses primarily on recent events. Trofimov shows knowledge of Ukraine's history and comments when necessary, but he is primarily focused on telling the story of the modern-day war, and he does this with remarkable clarity given all kinds of confusion that's presented around it. Often historical narratives can confuse the present-day situation by referencing past atrocities as opposed to discussing the events on the ground right now. Obviously, Russia and Ukraine view things like Holodomor differently. However, it's helpful to see somebody who's focused on the atrocities that are happening right now. As a professional journalist and not a historian, Trofimov is good at staying focused on topic. Perhaps the single best chapter in the book is the Istanbul Surprise, where Trofimov discusses the negotiations that took place in late March 2022. While there is much debate concerning these negotiations, such as the claim that the West forced Ukraine to abandon negotiations and to keep fighting, or that Russia was using it as a distraction from the war crimes committed in Bucha, Trofimov explains the chronology of these events, which sheds light on the matter. He also quotes Boris Johnson, Joe Biden, and what they were saying during the time of negotiations. He provides a quote that Boris Johnson said it was up to the Ukrainians to decide, which conflicts with the Russian narrative that Boris Johnson forced the Ukrainians to stop negotiations. The most important question that Trofimov discusses is whether or not Russia's evacuation from the territories surrounding Kiev was a genuine act of goodwill, as Putin told Tucker Carlson in their interview, or if it was merely a strategic shift. Trofimov at least gives the context and provides a few points defending the claim that it was a strategic shift, while citing Russia's RIA media and Russian military officials like Ryor Gorkin to support his claim that it was a strategic shift. While he doesn't always present all the evidence that refutes the Russian narrative, such as information concerning Russia's food supply, victory medals, and dress uniforms, the attempt to address the question is much appreciated. So Russia had dress uniforms prepared for them. They also had victory medals that had certain dates published on the victory medals indicating they thought they would occupy Kiev much faster than they actually did. And they also had supplies for 3 days indicating that they didn't expect the conflict to last very long. The evidence does not support the claim that it was an act of goodwill, as Putin said. Other areas in the book show remarkable insight are his sections on military realities. Trofimov doesn't succumb to propaganda when describing both the successes and failures of the Ukrainian army, and he's able to explain why delayed U.S. support has had catastrophic outcomes. Trofimov provides good details surrounding the military landscape. Given the war deals with real locations that are not always major cities or cultural landmarks, it helps to have a map or a deeper understanding of Ukrainian geography. As someone who lived in Ukraine and professionally talked with people from different regions as an ESL teacher, I perhaps have a better knowledge of Ukrainian geography than most Americans. That said, it's still pretty confusing. Trofimov even describes how journalists often got their information wrong in trying to decipher which areas were occupied or not. So his clarity in this field is much appreciated. It'd be good to have a map while reading this book. I know I appreciate my maps. Other topics in Trofimov's book include the Kherson occupation, where he describes how certain rulers caved to the Russians. This is something very few Western medias have discussed. He also provides account from people who lived under occupation in Kharkiv Oblast and the conditions in which they chose to collaborate. Again, this is a subject that's not usually discussed in Western media, and Trofimov is perhaps the best commentator on the matter. He doesn't claim that the Russians were liberators. He doesn't paint a pretty picture of Ukrainian resistance, but he deals with the cold realities of people collaborating under desperate situations. He does this with remarkable clarity. Trofimov's Our Enemies Will Vanish overall is the best book I've read that focuses primarily on the post-2022 military and political landscape of Ukraine. The only other book I can cite so presently focused is Owen Matthews' Overreach. But where other books dwell on history, Trofimov is able to focus on events we've all read about, but have been muddled by Russian disinformation or generalizations. Fortunately, there are authors and journalists like Trofimov who provide clarity on this. Anyway, if you like this video, feel free to like or subscribe. I'm doing this channel for my own educational purposes, so if I was inaccurate in any of my information, or if I misrepresented Trofimov's views, please let me know. Thank you. God bless.